The fighting in the Middle East, specifically the war in Iran, is promising to overshadow a high-stakes meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping later this week in Beijing. It's the first time a U.S. president will be visiting China in close to a decade. The White House has said it is of tremendous symbolic significance and promised that Donald Trump will deliver more good deals for Americans. But Trump also hopes to get China to use its leverage over Iran to push for concessions and peace talks. When the two last came face-to-face during a brief meeting on the sidelines of an APEC summit in Busan last year, the emphasis was on stabilizing strained ties. This time, the agenda is much heavier. Trade, technology, Taiwan, and the global security climate will all loom large, making the meeting an important test of how Washington and Beijing can manage their rivalry going forward. Journalist and Middle East analyst Gordon Robison joins me now. Gordon, welcome back to DW. Now, the last time a U.S. president visited China was almost a decade ago. It was the same president as the one who's going now, Donald Trump. The mood was a little different back then, wasn't it? How is this visit different to the one back in 2017?
Well, U.S.-China summits are always somewhat fraught. They're always very high stakes, kind of the way U.S.-Soviet summits were a generation or two ago. The Chinese are very angry about Trump's trade policies. And of course, the war in the Middle East, even though it's a long way from either China or the U.S., is factoring into all of this. The United States believes that China could be helpful and has not been. The Chinese are very concerned that the U.S. not get their ships involved in the war. A lot of China's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and it's obviously a priority for China that not get messed with. Neither vessels flagged as Chinese or vessels that aren't strictly speaking Chinese but are headed for China. So there are a lot of moving parts, as is always the case.
Yeah, there are a lot of potential topics on the table, though, right? We have trade, we have tech, we have Taiwan. To what extent do you expect Iran to overshadow all of this? Is this going to be a summit ultimately about Iran?
Well, I am not a China expert, so I may punt on that, but one can certainly say that Iran will be part of this, both because the U.S. thinks that the Chinese could be more helpful, but also it gets even more complicated. If you look at the Gulf states, as recently as 3 months ago, before the war began, it was conventional wisdom out in the Gulf that the Gulf states were edging away from the United States and downgrading their relationship with the U.S. and getting closer to China. That's really completely reversed just in these couple of months.
Is that so? Because the U.S. did not really talk to their Gulf allies before the war started. They didn't consult them. They didn't really jump to their defense when then Iran started retaliating, attacking targets in the Gulf. They must consider the U.S. a very unreliable partner.
Well, so that is all true, but you just phrased it very well. They consider the U.S. a very unreliable partner, but I think it's also been driven home to them that if China were their primary partner, China's not going to help them out at all. China is not going to sell them weapons to help protect them against Iran. China is not going to replace the weapons that they have fired off over the last 2 months. What I think has been reinforced in places like Dubai and Riyadh and Kuwait and Doha is that the Americans may be unreliable, but an unreliable partner is better than a partner that doesn't see supporting you militarily as its problem at all.
China buys most of the Iranian oil. How important a partner is China for Iran at this stage where it is under attack? Now, we have a ceasefire, of course, but how crucial has this alliance of sorts been for Iran throughout this war?
It is enormously important for the Iranians. Obviously, China is enormously bigger than Iran. So, put another way, China is more important to Iran than Iran is to China. A lot of Chinese oil comes through the Gulf, but the Chinese have other sources of oil. For the Iranians, the Chinese are their primary customer for whom the American and other Western sanctions don't matter. China is one of the few big customers of Iranian oil that is big enough to ignore the American sanctions. And also, the Americans are not going to mess with Chinese-flagged vessels. They're just not, because that would cause so many other problems. So, yes, China's economic support and its intelligence or political support is hugely important to Iran, and there's no way that doesn't somehow get discussed during this meeting.
The Iranian foreign minister traveled to China just last week.
Well, that's a sign of what we've been talking about.
Exactly. To what extent do you think they were trying to massage leadership in Beijing ahead of this meeting between Xi and Trump?
Maybe massage leadership, but an easier way of saying it would simply be they want to make sure that the Chinese understand what the Iranians' priorities are when the Chinese meet with the Americans. It's also possible, I mean, the Pakistanis have been the most prominent interlocutor between the Americans and the Iranians, but the Chinese could, in theory, be well positioned to play that role as well, should they wish to. I've got no idea whether they do, but they are a substantial and important country that has relations with both sides. So it may be that the Iranians want to get the Chinese somehow involved.
Yeah. What does Donald Trump want out of this meeting when it comes to the war in Iran?
He wants Chinese help. I think the big question, and we won't really know till the summit's over, is does he know what he means by Chinese help? I mean, I don't want to sound ungenerous of spirit, but I think part of the problem throughout these last 2 months has been that President Trump sends mixed messages to friends and foes alike. So, I mean, what exactly does he want from the Chinese? I think the first question is, does he even know what he wants from the Chinese? And is he aware of how, whatever that is, affects all the other things? It's a jigsaw puzzle. I'm going to mix my metaphors. It's a jigsaw puzzle with a lot of moving parts. And with all due respect to the Trump administration has not so far demonstrated that it's good at looking at the big picture rather than looking at each individual moving part by itself.
It's widely believed that Beijing did push Iran to continue these talks about ceasefires, about a possible peace deal with the U.S. Now, Scott Bessent, the head of the U.S. Treasury, said that the Chinese should keep up the diplomacy or step up the diplomacy. And you are very well versed when it comes to the Middle East, and certainly when it comes to Iran. Has outside pressure ever worked on Iran?
Publicly, no. Privately, yes. I mean, I think when you look at Iran over the last 2 generations, one thing you see is that the Iranians often talk as though they are an irrational actor, but they act fairly rationally. Not always, I will grant, but the Iranians do not always act in ways that would be indicated by their public statements. There have been a lot of hints in the last few weeks that there is more going on behind the scenes than we are aware of publicly. I think, first of all, for the sake of peace, we all have to hope that's the case. And perhaps what Secretary Bessent was saying is that China has been involved in that and he wants them to be more involved. And again, the Iranians would probably see the Chinese as an interlocutor they would be comfortable dealing with.
For all intents and purposes, the war in Iran is not going great for the U.S. To what extent do you think that has shifted the balance of power going into this meeting?
Well, I think we've been in a situation for several weeks where both the Americans and the Iranians want a solution, but they have different time frames. Trump wants a solution now. He got himself into this mess. He wants to get out of it, and he wants to get out of it quickly and cleanly. The Iranians would like it to end, and economically it's really beginning to bite in Iran. We've seen that just in the last couple of weeks, but they are willing to wait. They have a longer timeline. They're willing to show more patience, and that's one of the things that I think may slow things down. That one side wants a quick deal, the other side is willing to wait. Both sides want to be seen to win out of whatever the final deal is. We saw that just over the weekend with the Iranian proposal that President Trump rejected. I mean, the Iranians' own account of the proposal. The United States is never going to pay reparations to Iran. We can have a separate philosophical discussion about whether it should, but it's simply not going to happen. There were things on the list that the Iranians know are non-starters. So the question is, are they willing to move beyond that? I think like most diplomatic problems, it is probably solvable, but I'm less confident than I was a week ago that we might be nearing some longer-term solution.
Yeah. Donald Trump, I think we both know it, he's going to come out of this summit claiming victory of some sort, saying this was great, he got what he wanted.
Huge and historic, and something that's never been done before.
Yeah, we've been here before. What are you going to be looking for to determine whether or not this really went his way, or whether or not, the Chinese can actually claim that this went their way and they got more out of it than they expected?
Well, I think what we have to hope for is some sort of a win-win where the Chinese, the Iranians, the Americans, and the Israelis all get what they expect. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but again, I try to be optimistic and think that there's probably a way to get there. I think what we have to watch is not what people say immediately after the summit, but what happens on the ground in the water in the days and weeks immediately after the summit, because I suspect that we are not going to get some big announcement of an agreement, though it is conceivable that we could get some sort of an announcement that the two sides are going to talk again. Though one of the things the Americans, I think, learned from the failed talks in Pakistan several weeks ago is that you shouldn't send your highest level envoys into a situation where there isn't an agreement basically ready to wrap up. Hopefully, one of the things the Trump administration has learned from this is you need to do the nuts and bolts negotiating at a lower level and bring the big people in to finish things off.
Gordon Robison, always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.